Okay, let's take a listen now to this track after I've mixed it, and then we'll do more of a discussion afterwards. Okay, this piece has many different sections to it, and in each section there is a different instrument that is the focal point. And so that's a big part of mixing a piece like this, is making sure that whatever the solo instrument is, the soloist, the focal point, that is loud enough to be heard, but not so loud that it becomes separate from the rest of the track. So that is something that's really important to pay attention to when you're mixing. Now, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Whoops, wrong way. Okay. And we're just going to go through the different sections here, and I'm going to first talk about a lot of volume work that I did using mostly clip gain in Pro Tools. Now, your DAW, you should see how to get to clip gain on yours. And what clip gain is you could take a little section and raise or lower the volume. So starting off with the drums, and I think last night I played the drums by itself, but I think this time I want to have the bass playing also with the drums. Let me get this turned back on. Okay, and then the drums VCA. Now, the drums sound really good, but there are a few spots where the snare drum is a little bit loud, or a fill is not loud enough, and I wanted to bring those things out in the mix. So take, for example, right here, this tick-a-tit-tim. So that is loud. This right here, I brought the volume of that up. the next little fill. So I went through the piece and I'm listening to all these interesting things the drummer's doing, and whenever all the other instruments are playing, I can't really hear them. And this is one reason why getting your gain structure is very important, because if everything in the drums is very hot, very loud, excuse me, once you start turning up this clip gain, you're going to start introducing some distortion. But because we've got a good gain structure, you have some wiggle room here to play with turning these volumes of these individual clips up. So, for example, right here, that crash was way loud, so I used the clip gain and I brought the volume of that clip gain down. Right, that's the original volume. And now, I noticed that there was a funny transition here when I went back to the next drum hit. So the clip gain is from this drum transient, the hit, to the next one. So what I did was a crossfade here. Now, you can hear that the volume changes a little bit when you get to the crossfade, but it's much less drastic than it was without the crossfade. And with the rest of the track playing, you don't hear that at all. Right? The boom, boom. I wasn't hearing that before. I brought that up. And I can go through the entire drum track and bring out these fills. Bring down some of the crashes on the downbeat. This one, I didn't have to touch. It's fine. Now, you also have to realize that this drummer's fantastic on this track. He's doing this all to a click track, and he's making it sound like it's natural and really flowing. And the reason it's done to a click track is this is a film score, and some of these things are timed to things that are going on in the film. So I have to have a click track for everybody to play to. And literally, he came in, and this is maybe the third run through of the piece. We recorded it. So he didn't have time to practice how loud these fills should be, and also the miking techniques that we did with just two overheads. You have to sort of enhance and bring out some of the salient aspects of what the player is playing, and that's what we're doing here. All just with volume. And then right here, I use the VCA gain in this section. Right here, to make that whole section a little softer. Give us a nice contrast with the next section. I could actually even do something like this, which I didn't notice this before, and this cross stick here. I could bring the volume of that up a little bit. Right? Same here. So notice I'm going from the transient of the hit to the transient of the next hit with the clip gain. Nice. Okay. So let's see if there's anything else. I left the kick drum pretty much the same, and just in a couple of spots like here and here, I brought the snare drum down. So you just have to go through the piece. So also here, the snare drum's a little softer, and do these things. Let's take a look at the EQ that I'm using. This is called a shelf EQ, and this is the stock 7-band EQ in Pro Tools. It's fine. It doesn't have a sound or a coloration, and you sometimes have to turn up the effect a little bit higher than I would on some other EQs, but I can get a perfectly fine sound from this particular bit of software. So right here at about 4.51K, I'm just bringing up this whole bit a couple of dB, and I'm making sure that my Q it's not really sharp, but it's a nice slope that starts around that point. And let's play it, just the drums overhead. Oh, sorry. Turn it off. Just adds a little shine to the cymbals. I'll exaggerate the effect. So that's at 1.7 dB. Let me turn that up so you can really hear what it does. Right, that's too much. Just a little touch, just to add a little bit of sheen. Now with the kick drum, let's turn the bass off for a sec. So I'm doing two things here, right? I'm adding just a low frequency shelf right here, just bringing everything up below about 150 hertz, just to add some fullness to the kick drum. And then right here, this is the snap. Let me turn the clip gain up here so you can really hear that a little bit better, and I'll back it down when we're done. Right, if I turn that off, it's a little thuddy, and now you can just hear the snap a little bit more. And let me exaggerate this. So that's at 1.97. Let me make that really sharp. Right, you can hear it really emphasizes the snap of the beater. And that just helps the kick drum punch through a little bit. And remember, the way I found that frequency was I made my Q really tight. And you could hear trying to find something that has that snap, but the upper frequencies, see how those are clashing? Bring it back down. And then widen this Q a little bit. And then I added a second EQ afterwards because I didn't want to have the really low frequencies coming in. I wanted to save that stuff for the bass guitar, but I just wanted to have a little bit more fullness in the kick drum. And with the snare drum, I think I just did a high pass filter just to get rid of the lows. And let's take a listen to that. Let me get this back down. And let's bring this up here. Yeah, it just clears out some of the kick that's bleeding through this microphone. Okay. Now let's take a look at our bass. Now, previously, I had a certain concept for how I was going to EQ the bass, but I wasn't getting the sound that I wanted. So I made a decision to start over and re-EQ the bass. And what I did was I decided that I was going to make the TLM 103 have most of the fullness, make the 184, which is on the fingerboard. The TLM 103 is by the sound holes bridge, about a foot and a half out. And this is up by the fingerboard, maybe shoulder height, and about a foot away, getting the snap of the strings. And the DI is the direct injection, and we'll talk about that in a second. But let's just solo the bass, TLM 103. I wanted to make this the full body sound and then add some of the snap here. So with the EQ here, I just did a little bit of shelving, adding a lot of low end here. Let's turn this clip gain up so you can really hear it. It just adds a little bit of low frequency in there. Let me undo. And I blended that in with the K184. And let's just play this by itself. So you can hear how much thinner that is. And what I did was a high pass, and again, I did a sweep, and I found that this is where the slap is living, around 2.25. It's interesting. It's similar frequency as the kick drum. And then blend those two together. So this track gives you all the fullness, and this gives you the definition. And see, that's a little bit distorted. I've decided to use, instead of the Sans amp, which I got a decent sound from the Sans amp, but I like the way this soft tube saturation knob works. Now, this is a freebie. You'd have to go to this company's website, softtube.com, and I think you give them your email address, and then you can download this for free for any DAW. It's AX, AU, AAX, and VST. And it's very simple. It's one knob, and I'm keeping everything neutral. And it's just a little bit of grit, right? Now, one thing I want to emphasize here is that, and I said this towards the end of the class last night, I can play any two sections. I can play the drums and the bass. I can play the drums and the piano. I can play the drums and the brass. And they all sound balanced between each other. They fit in like a glove. I could play the bass and the brass. I could play the bass and the piano. I could play the piano and the drums. I could play the piano and the brass. And everything would sound good. And this is something that you should do actually when you're writing. So if you're writing a big band chart for Professor Mossman, you should hear, if you're using Finale or Sibelius, you can listen to just the saxophones and the trombones. You can listen to just the trumpets and the trombones, and you can hear what they sound like. You can listen to the soprano and the tenor voice of your four voice chords between the different sections and hear how they sound together. So you could hear in your trumpets, you can hear your first trumpet and your third trumpet, and you could listen to the trombones, and you could hear the second trombone and the fourth trombone when they're all playing in unison, 2D sections. And this is the way that you can really hear what your music sounds like. And it's the same thing with a mix. You're listening to how all the different sections blend in together and create the unified whole. And they should all organically sound good together, and also in pairs, in three groups of instruments. Everything should sound really nice and balanced. Okay, so let's add the piano to the mix now. And we haven't even talked about reverb or compression yet. And the piano, I've put compression right into the chain here. In the other instruments, I'm putting it into the submaster. And we'll get to that in a minute. Now, the piano's got some broad strokes in terms of clip gain, just to make sure that it's fulfilling its proper function. In the beginning here, I've got, as you can see, let's go down to that piano. There we go. Come on, scroll there. There we go. Minus 10.3. It's soft. Because it's the low brass that's holding that figure together. And I just want the piano to give a little percussive hit to the beginning. Now the piano's playing the melody. I bring the clip gain up. See, it's minus 7.5. Piano's loud enough to be heard as the melodic instrument here, but not so loud that it sticks out from the track and doesn't fit together. Okay, and then over here I bring the volume down because we come back to the beginning figure again, and now the piano's playing with the trumpet as the melody, so it's louder, but not quite as loud. It's minus 8.5 dB. That first time, I believe it was minus 7.5. And now we're just comping, playing chords. A accompanying the sax solo, I believe, there. And now this little figure here. Right, the melody comes back in, the piano's reorchestrated with lower left-hand notes. Piano's playing the figure here. And now notice, in that section there, I did not have the piano playing the da-da-da-da right here. I left that to the brass, and that's part of arranging, is to do something different every time through. The previous time, the piano played all the way through. Why have it be the same the next time? Whoops. I need to get a new mouse. One day when I can go to a store and try one out, that would be really helpful. Okay, great. And then now in this next section, the piano is again comping for the saxophone. And now this section here, piano's playing just that little melody there, and it's louder than it's been. And then back here to the melody again. And at the end here, I've got the piano a little bit louder than the beginning. And then, I don't know why I did that. Maybe I should just bring it down so it's a little bit more cohesive. But the other bit too is that right here, I've made my last chord much softer. Now let's take a look at the EQ on the piano. So this is just a high pass. Let's turn all these off. So the piano's muddy right now. That's my problem with it. This is not a solo piano. If this was solo piano, I would EQ it differently, but it needs to fit in this track. And at times the brass is pretty dense, so I need to make sure the piano fits in, doesn't clash with any of the frequencies in the left hand with the bass clarinet and the baritone saxophone, and also fits in with the tenor sax and the trumpet. So right there, you could hear right now the piano cuts through a little differently. So let me do this again. So it's comping right now, just playing rhythm. So it's a subtle difference. It's not a huge difference, but it makes a difference. You can hear it. I don't have to turn it up loud enough. I don't have to turn the piano up louder because these lower frequencies are not clashing and getting masked by the bass, so I can keep the piano a little softer and let these upper frequencies cut through. And let's see what I did here on this one. Right, so the piano had a little bit of a mid-range honk, which most pianos do, so I took a little bit out at 500, which you probably won't be able to hear, but I hear it so loud because I'm so used to it. And now with the compression, I've got the ratio set to 3:1. And I've got the attack set to 40 milliseconds with a slower release. And the threshold just so that it keeps the peaks tamed. But it doesn't crush the piano sound. So you probably wouldn't hear the difference between the two. It's just subtly keeping the peaks tamed. I don't want to do any coloration or some drastic stuff to the piano. I just want to keep it a little smoother. Okay, and then now we're with our brass, and let's take a look at this. Let me scroll down. Brass VCA. So we can hear everything now, actually. Let's make this a little bit softer, smaller, I mean, so I can get all my instruments in there. All right. So we're starting out with the bari sax and the bass clarinet. And as I went over last week in class, I'm doing some automation here on the brass VCA just to give a decrescendo so that we get the attack, we get the sustain, but we leave space so that the bass figure do can come through without being bothered by these long sustained notes. And basically I've gone through and you can see that I've done a lot of balancing with changing, clip gain, all those places. And it gets to the point where I really paid attention when I was listening. And right here, for example, I worked on these individual notes here because they weren't, and I turned them up because I couldn't hear them in the harmony. So let's solo just the brass, and let's play a little before that finish. So you can hear these notes now, right? They were too soft before. I couldn't hear them, so I brought them up. This note here was too loud, so I brought it down in the tenor. This whole section here was a little too soft, so I brought it up. So you can hear right there, it's balanced, right? You can hear the trumpet is the melody, the tenor sax is the harmony, and you could hear these low instruments here as the support. But the focus is really on these two guys here. The tenor might be a little bit too loud. I'd have to keep listening. And this is louder still so that it's playing the melody with the piano now, I believe. Let's get our piano in there. So do you hear how those two together sound very balanced? And that's a big part of mixing. With the tenor, I brought down this first lick a little bit because I thought it was too loud. So that's the kind of volume stuff I did with this. Now let's take a look at EQ. So with the trumpet, let's go find something where trumpet 1 is playing. And I did this, I just copied the settings onto the other two trumpet tracks. So we can start here with trumpet 3. Again, high pass filter, just to get rid of any rumble that was in the recording booth, any other low frequency things, because I don't really need them inside the track. If it was a solo trumpet, that might be like completely solo, or maybe just playing with a flutist, a duet, I might leave it all in there, but inside the track, I don't need all those frequencies. And I've got a 7-band EQ doing a high frequency shelf just to add some shine to the sax, to the trumpet, because I thought it was a little dull. So let me mute these. Right, it's a little dark. So if first thing I do is I turn on the low pass. Turn on the high pass, excuse me. On. And then I'll turn the EQ 7-band on and off, and you'll be able to hear the difference. Right, you hear more of the edginess from the trumpet there. So that cuts through the mix a little better. Let's see what I do with the tenor sax. Yeah, so I did a little boost here. That was my first. Let's see, where is a place where it's playing more than just a couple of notes? Here we go. So it's a little dark to my ears. Why is that? I don't know, maybe because I'm older now and I need to hear some more high frequency, but it's also the way in the room that it was all recorded in. Very dark room, very tight room, and not a lot of space for the full sound of the instruments to speak. So we have to add a little help. Also, we want it to cut through the track. So I just did a little. You can hear just a little bite. And then here, I took some frequencies after that and brought it down. And some of the mid-range down. Right here. Low mids. And I have the first, I just took off some of the high frequencies on the tenor sax solo. And I compressed it so that when it's playing solo, I don't have to do as much volume adjustments. And I'm just hitting it, let's see. Yeah, it's just really keeping some of the peaks. I mean, it's 1.8 to 1. It's barely compressing it, but it's just keeping some of the peak volumes intact. And as I said last night, you've got all these very tiny moves which, in isolation, don't appear to do much. But when you add them up over all the tracks, you start to hear the difference in the way the track sounds. So that's something to keep in mind when you're mixing. Subtle changes on many tracks add up to a big difference. I've done nothing with EQ to the bari sax, with the bass clarinet. Yes, just some high pass. Now, I did something else here, which I showed you last night, and I'll go over it again. This one note here really bothered me. It just had a very honky sound, and it didn't blend in with the other instruments. So Pro Tools has this feature called clip effects, where I can separate out a clip, like a little spot in this audio file, and I can apply a separate effect to that. So I just really went to town and took down all of this frequency here, which looks really ugly, but it helps to balance that one bit in with the rest of the brass. If I were to turn that EQ off, you hear that in the left ear? Off. Yeah, it really bothers me. It still might actually be a little bit too loud too, so let me bring it down a little bit. Get that back on. Okay, and you access clip effects up here. And you can hide them. They're really handy. If you're working on a film, clip effects are amazing. Dialogue and sound effects. And again, here at the end, right? We've done our volume automation. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hide the audio tracks. So now we just have our VCAs. Oh, except I need to have my piano track. So let me get my piano track back in there. All right, so we only have the piano track, and we just have the VCAs and the submasters and the effects so that I can follow along without having to scroll the screen too much. So with our drums, let's solo them. So I just added a little bit of bump right here for some fullness and took just a tiny bit out of the mid. Just a little bit more thump to the kick. And then as far as compression goes, again, 3 to 1, just barely kissing it. Just taming the highest, the loudest hits, bringing them down just a little bit. You can see there's very little gain reduction happening here. I'm going to get to the reverb in a second, but let me just go through here. And then this is a different kind of a compressor. This comes, I'm just using the stock Pro Tools plugins on this, except for the soft tube. I have much better plugins, but I can get the point across and still make a good sounding mix with these. This is based on an 1176 compressor hardware unit, and you have your attack and release, and just 4 ratios. And then there's a trick. These are all buttons that you click in, and there's a trick where you could push all 4 buttons in, which they do to get really trashy drum sounds. The way the attack works with this is that 7 is the fastest attack, 7 is the fastest release, and then 1 would be the slowest attack and 1 would be the slowest release. So that's backwards. So I've got this set to a moderate attack and a moderate release. And the way that and I've got it set as a ratio of 4:1. Oh, that's on the bass. Excuse me. Right. So let's have the bass going. And you can see I'm doing a lot of compression here. And there's a slight coloration added to the sound. This is Bomb Factory. The Pro Tools is ported over from like Pro Tools 8 or 9. It's a very old, and it was one of the very first modeling compressors, this and the Fairchild that Bomb Factory came out with. The newer models have gotten tremendously better by Universal Audio, and I have all those, but I'm trying to do something where if I upload this, which I will, those of you that have Pro Tools can download it and study the mix a little bit more. So the way that you get things to compress more with this, it doesn't have a threshold. You drive the input. And you can hear now I'm getting a lot of sustain on those notes. That would be cool for an effect, but it's too much. So I bring it back down. And the way that this works to gain match or volume match is that these two should be the opposite of each other. In other words, this is set to maybe 11 o'clock right now, and this is set to 1 o'clock. If this was set to 1 o'clock, then you would start off with this set to about 11 o'clock to keep the volume. That's really compressing a lot out of that. So that's a general guide, then you'd have to fine tune it. All right, and now let's do our brass. Whoops. And in the brass, I just have some light compression. Again, small ratio, 2:1, 2.3:1. This attack could be a little bit fast. Let me raise that attack up a little bit. Just taming the peaks, right? I'm just don't want it to be heard as compression. I just want it as a little bit of a volume rider. I'm not affecting the sound. I showed you how to make it really trashy sounding in the earlier part of the class, and I do have that video which I can upload also. But the mix is the more important part right now because I'm going to go over those principles again. All right, now let's talk about reverb. So I've got 1, 2, 3 different kinds of reverbs here and a delay. So the plate reverb, let's see who's going with the plate. All right, so I've got the drums going through a plate reverb. And this is the basic reverb from Pro Tools, Deverb. Not a great reverb. The plates are very usable though. So what I did here was I called up the bright plate preset, and then I adjusted it. The first thing I did was I brought the gain all the way up because I've got this on a send, and I went over that in class yesterday, and I'll keep going over that. So if you don't know how to do a send, don't worry about it. I'll go over it again in the next class. And these are the 3 controls to worry about. The decay is how long the reverb is. can see that tail lasts much longer. If I make it shorter, right after I stop it, you can hear that it sort of swishes down. So put that back to 1.6. And then the high frequency cut, I'm just it's like a low pass filter. I'm just taking some of the. I find that high frequency on this is very sharp. It kind of bothers me. So I'm just taming that a little bit. And I went over last night, what a plate is. It's a physical piece of metal being suspended perpendicular to the ground. And it's got two transducers on it. One feeds audio from the mixing console, and one acts like a microphone. And you send audio to it. And it was the first, that and Spring Reverbs were the two first artificial reverb units. So it's got a very bright sound to it. It can have a very bright sound, and it's great on drums, percussion. It's great on trumpets. It's great on acoustic guitars. It's great on vocals. It's really a great sound. So I've got that here. And chamber. So, right. So this is a chamber. So what's going through the chamber? So the piano is going through the chamber. So let's take a listen to that. So a chamber, what a chamber reverb is, and I sent you that material to read. A chamber is a sealed room, usually in a recording studio, that has one or two speakers permanently set up and one or two microphones permanently set up. And from the mixing console, you will send audio through the speakers that are in this sealed chamber, usually very hard cement wall or wooden walls. It's soundproofed as much as it can be. And the sound reverberates in that room, and the microphone picks it up. So it's like sending the audio into another room and recording the sound of that room. So this is a medium-sized chamber. And you can hear it's got a nice warm sound to it. So if I were to mute the chamber and then put it back in, you could use a plate on this. You could have used a hall on this. You could have used also a room on this. I chose a chamber because I wanted to have something to show you, basically, and it does sound good. Now on the brass master, I've got it going through. That's bass master, brass master. Oh, I know what I did with the brass. So let me just show you these. Okay, so with the brass, I wanted different amounts of delay and reverb on each instrument. So I have the brass going through what's called a brass plate that I made. Let's take a look at this. This is called space. It's a convolution reverb. The way space creates a reverb is an engineer goes and takes what's called an impulse recording or an impulse response by recording the characteristics of a particular room or piece of gear. So as I explained last night, you'd set up some speakers on a stage and somebody would sit in an audience chair, and somebody that's listening in the audience chair is a microphone or a set of microphones. They play a sound through the speakers, which is could be a sine wave sweep from the lowest frequencies all the way to the highest frequencies, and they capture the recording of that, or somebody stands on the stage and shoots a starter pistol, which excites, all those things excite the hall and create reverberant sounds in the hall or the room, and the microphone captures that. And then they use computational power to convolution to create a snapshot of that reverb, and then the reverb that you have here sounds like that hall at that spot in the hall that you're sitting in. Now, they can also do that with hardware gear, and right here they're doing it to an actual real plate. So I've got this plate here. So let's go to where the brass are, and let's just solo our brass. And you can hear it's got a very nice warm sound. And what did I do here? Right, I also did some high frequency work here and chopped some of this high frequency off. You can hear how much brighter it is. It was too bright for the track. Those frequencies there, excuse me, they get in the way of the ride cymbals. To my ears. So I got rid of them in the reverb and just got a nice warm sounding reverb. Very nice. Where's the trumpet solo? Okay, so here's the trumpet solo. Let's solo that. And I've added some delay to the trumpet. Let's take a look at what I've done with that. And on this one, I'm just using the stock mod delay 3. And this is a stereo delay, and you could set up a different delay time for the left and for the right. And I've got it right now set up so that it's synchronized to the tempo of this piece. And I've got my delay set to a quarter note, which is 397.4 milliseconds. So I'm going to turn off the reverb on the trumpet. And that's very soft. Let me turn up. So it's just below 20. I'll remember that. I'll turn it up here. I've added some reverb there, some delay there. So I've got a feedback of 21. Feedback is the number of echoes. Delay time is the amount of time between the original iteration of the sound and the first echo. So I've got a quarter note, or 397.4 milliseconds, and a feedback of 21%. So it's repeating like 4 times, maybe 3, 4, 5 times. If I turn the feedback up higher to like maybe in the 50, 60, right, it does more. Now, one important thing, let me get that back down. You can type in numbers here, which is fine. One important thing about trumpet echo feedback is using a low-pass filter to get rid of some of the high frequencies. So I've got this at 1138 hertz, right? So a little over 1K. If I do this, it's going to be the exact same sound repeating over and over again, right? And that's okay, but that gets in the way. It's sort of, there's too much of the same thing. So to differentiate between the echoes and the original signal, I chop off some of the high frequency. And in this case, I made it really dark. You know, I don't have to have exactly what I had before. It was somewhere around here. And each repeat gets darker because you're cutting more and more of the high frequencies as it repeats. And that sounds a lot like an analog delay pedal if you're a guitarist. So I've just added some of that in, and what it does is it extends the reverb a little bit. Right? Let me turn it up a little bit more so you can hear the effect in its overdone state. I can have a little bit more than I had. Let's listen to the whole track with it. You can hear now that it's too much. It's adding like a second trumpet player, but with just enough of it in there so that it's very subtle. It's a nice effect. All right, so I think that's a good tutorial, and what I'm going to do now is play this whole track again from beginning to end, showing all tracks. Let's get this set up at a good size, and let's zoom in. So for my regular YouTube viewers, I've been Pete Calandra. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, comment below if you've got any questions. I'll try to answer them over the next week or two. And thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.